It's almost a given these days, that feeling of, another potential ransomware attack just looming. And what really keeps me up at night is the thought that even with all the security measures we try to put in place, there could still be some hidden crack in the armor.
That's exactly the kind of scenario we're digging into today. We're
Right.
taking a close look at a very recent and pretty significant threat, a flaw discovered in Windows, known as CVE 2025-29824.
Okay.
And what makes this particularly concerning, really, is that attackers were actively exploiting it before Microsoft even knew it existed. A true zero-day situation.
Okay, 0 days. So the hackers were like in on a secret that even the software developers didn't know about. They had a head start using this thing.
Precisely.
Yep.
It's like they found an unmarked backdoor into the system,
Yeah.
and were just using it freely until, the lock could finally be changed.
Right.
And this specific backdoor, it resided in a really fundamental part of Windows, the common log file system, or CLFS
Understand.
driver. Okay. Yeah. Think of CLFS as sort of the basic plumbing system for Windows logging.
Hmm.
A flaw right there can affect many other parts of the OS. It's deep.
Wow. Okay. CLFS being compromised. That sounds like it could have really widespread implications then. So if someone actually exploited this, what kind of control could they gain?
So this was what we call an elevation of privilege vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you've got just a standard user account on your computer, limited access.
Mm-hmm.
This flaw allowed an attacker who might have initially gained just that basic access
Mm-hmm.
to essentially flip a switch and gain the highest level of permissions, what's called system privileges.
System level. Okay.
Yeah, at that point, they could pretty much do anything they wanted on the infected machine. It's like going from having permission to maybe read a few files to having the power to, rewrite the entire operating system.
That's a huge jump in control. And this wasn't just a theoretical risk, was it? I mean, this was actually happening out in the wild.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Microsoft rushed out a patch for this on April 8th, 2025, which really highlights the urgency.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just, one isolated incident. This vulnerability was being actively exploited in attacks targeting a surprisingly diverse range of organizations.
Correct.
We saw IT companies and real estate firms in the U.S., the finance sector down in Venezuela, a software company over in Spain, and even retailers in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
What does that tell us about who's at risk? It really just underscores that pretty much no sector or region is immune.
That's quite a global spread and a really diverse set of targets. So who are the actors behind these attacks? Who is taking advantage of this hidden vulnerability? And before we dive deeper into that, let's quickly mention our sponsor.
Right. Today's deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly, a leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
Yeah, and if you're looking for secure ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage solutions. You can contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo. Definitely worth checking out in light of what we're discussing.
Absolutely. So back to the attackers. From what we've gathered, there were at least two primary threat groups exploiting this flaw as a zero-day.
Two groups. Okay.
The first one we should focus on is tracked as Storm 2460. This group was seen using a specific piece of malware they call PipeMagic.
PipeMagic, that sounds kind of ominous. What role did it play in these attacks?
Well, in this scenario, PipeMagic essentially acted as the delivery vehicle. After they successfully exploited the CLFS vulnerability to get those top-level system privileges,
Mm-hmm.
Storm 2460 used PipeMagic to then deploy ransomware.
Okay, so the vulnerability gets them in the door with high privileges, and PipeMagic brings in the really nasty stuff.
Yeah.
How did they get PipeMagic onto the systems in the first place?
Their method was actually quite clever. They used a legitimate built-in Windows tool called Certillo.
Certil, I think I've heard of that. Isn't that for managing digital certificates or something?
Exactly. It's a trusted utility. The attackers misused it to download malicious files, specifically these things called MS build files from websites they had previously compromised.
Ah, so they're hiding in plain sight again, using a legit tool to download bad stuff.
Precisely. It highlights that common tactic, leveraging trusted system tools for malicious purposes, which makes detection much harder,
Yeah, definitely. So once PipeMagic landed, what was its next move? What did it do?
Well, PipeMagic seems designed to be quite versatile. It can act as a persistent backdoor, allowing the attackers to maintain access to the compromised system over time.
Right.
And it also acts as a gateway to introduce other malicious software and launch further attacks deeper inside the network.
Okay.
Once it was inside, they were observed injecting their malicious code directly into a really critical Windows process called winlogon.exe.
Winlogon.exe. Wait, isn't that integral to the whole login process when you start your computer? Like super important.
That's the one, exactly. Injecting code right there gives them a very deep and, importantly, persistent foothold in the operating system. It'll run again even after a reboot.
Wow, okay. That's sneaky. What happened after that?
Following that, they used another legitimate tool, sysinternal's Procdump.exe. They used it to create a copy, a snapshot really, of the memory of the LSAS process.
LSAT, okay, that's where Windows keeps those crucial login credentials while you're actually logged in, isn't it? So they were trying to steal usernames and passwords.
That's precisely the goal, yep. With those credentials in hand, they could then move laterally across the network much more easily, hop from machine to machine and further escalate their access.
Right, spread the infection.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal, as we mentioned, was ransomware deployment. Now, while we don't have the exact ransomware file they used for analysis in this case, the evidence strongly suggests it was likely a variant of RansomEXX.
RansomEXX. Yeah, that's a name we've unfortunately heard quite a bit in the context of serious ransomware attacks. What specifically pointed towards RansomEXX here?
Well, a couple of things. The ransom notes they left behind, which were named retmerexx2.txt, contained links to specific .onion addresses on the dark web. And these specific addresses, they have a known history of being associated directly with the RansomEXX ransomware family.
Oh, okay. The calling card, basically.
Pretty much. And additionally, the way the ransomware itself was executed using a process called dllhost.exe with a very specific command line parameter that also matches the known execution patterns for RansomEXX.
Got it. So the 0-day gets them in with power. PipeMagic establishes the foothold and grabs credentials, and then they deploy RansomEXX using known techniques to encrypt everything and demand payment. It's a grimly familiar pattern, just, starting with a particularly dangerous and unknown entry point this time.
That sums it up well.
What else did Storm 2460 do in these attacks? Did they try to hinder recovery?
Oh, definitely. They followed the typical ransomware playbook aimed at making recovery as difficult as possible for the victims.
Like what?
This included things like disabling the built-in Windows recovery options, deleting backup catalogs so victims couldn't easily restore from previous file versions, and clearing out event logs to try and erase their tracks and make any forensic analysis much more challenging. Yeah, standard nasty stuff. Maximize the pressure to pay the ransom. Now, you mentioned there was another group exploiting this same vulnerability.
Yes, that's right. The second group is known as Balloonfly, and they have established connections to the Play ransomware operation.
Play ransomware, another major player.
Indeed. And what's particularly interesting here is that they also exploited CVE 2025-29824 as a 0-day, meaning they were using it even before the patch was publicly available, just like Storm 2460.
Wow. Is it surprising that two different, seemingly unconnected groups found this 0-day independently? Or does that maybe suggest something about the vulnerability itself? Maybe it wasn't that hard to find for sophisticated actors. It certainly highlights the value and potential impact of such flaws, whether they found it independently or perhaps the exploit code was shared or sold somehow. Well, that's harder to say. But it definitely shows multiple actors were aware of it and using it.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Multiple sophisticated actors having the same secret weapon in their arsenal at the same time. What did Balloonfly's attacks look like? Were they similar to Storm 2460's methods?
Well, in the specific attack we observed from Balloonfly, they deployed an info stealer called Grixpa.
Grixpa. Okay,
Sure.
An info stealer, not ransomware directly.
Right. What's notable is that in this particular instance, they didn't actually proceed to deploy the Play ransomware itself. They stopped after the info stealing stage, it seems.
Huh. So their primary goal in this case seems to have been stealing information rather than immediate encryption and ransom.
It appears to be the case, yes. Now, there's a possibility, maybe even a likelihood, that their initial access to the targeted network might have been through a different vulnerability altogether. Specifically, there's some indication it might have been one affecting Cisco ASA appliances, those network security devices.
Okay, so maybe they got a foot in the door via the Cisco flaw, then used the Windows CLFS 0-day.
Exactly. Use the 0-day to elevate their privileges within the system once they were already inside the network perimeter, and then deployed Grixpa.
Makes sense. And what exactly does this Grixpa infostealer do? What kind of information were they trying to get their hands on?
Grixpa is designed to be a pretty comprehensive information gathering tool. It collects a really wide range of details about the compromised computer, and importantly, the network it's connected to.
Like what kind of details?
Things like information about user accounts, the computer's hardware and software configuration, what services are running, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And it uses various built-in Windows management tools, things administrators use, like WMI, WinRM, Remote Registry, and Remote Services, to collect all this data. Then it saves it all in easily readable CSV files.
So these are like the standard built-in ways for administrators to manage computers remotely, and the attackers are just hijacking those tools for their own recon.
Exactly. They're living off the land, using what's already there.
So they're essentially creating a very detailed map of the compromised environment. I mean, that kind of information would be incredibly valuable, wouldn't it? For planning future attacks, maybe for extortion, even without deploying ransomware right away, or even just selling that intel to other malicious actors.
Precisely. It's highly valuable data. And Grixpa also has specific routines built in to check for the presence of security software, antivirus, EDR, also backup solutions, and even remote administration tools that might be installed.
Ah, so they can figure out what defenses they need to get around.
Exactly. It helps them understand the target environment and plan their next steps, or just know what data is most valuable.
Okay. And unlike Storm 2460's observed methods, you mentioned earlier that Balloonfly's exploit wasn't fileless. They actually dropped files onto the system.
That's correct. In their exploitation process, they created specific files on the hard drive. One was located at cprogram data skypdf pdudrv.blf. Now, this is actually a CLFS base log file, basically a byproduct of triggering the exploit itself.
Okay, an artifact. What else?
The other was a DLL file they named clsrv.ens. And just like Storm 2460's payload, they injected this DLL into that same critical winlogon.exe process we talked about.
Both groups targeting winlogon.exe.
Interesting. And this injected DLL, clsrv.enf, was responsible for further actions on the compromised system then.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This DLL was designed to drop 2 additional batch files onto the system.
Batch files.
The first one was named servetask.bat. Its job was responsible for further privilege escalation tasks, including dumping the SAM, system, and security registry hives again, targeting those sensitive credential stores, and also for creating a brand new user account with full administrator privileges.
Creating a new admin user, yeah, that's a classic move for attackers, isn't it? To ensure they have persistent high-level access, even if their initial entry point gets discovered and closed later. It's a standard persistence technique, absolutely.
What about the second batch file? What did it do?
The second one was called cmdpostfix.bat, and its primary function seemed to be cleanup. It would try to remove some of the files that were created during the exploit process, basically an attempt to reduce the digital footprint of their activity and make detection harder.
So they're not just breaking in and stealing data, they're also actively trying to cover their tracks afterwards to avoid detection. How did they get these batch files, like servetask.bat, to actually run with the necessary high privileges?
They leveraged another built-in Windows feature, the task scheduler.
Ah, okay.
They created a new scheduled task, and in some cases, they actually modified existing legitimate scheduled tasks to execute these batch files with the elevated system permissions they needed to carry out their malicious actions.
So they're not just running these commands directly in the moment, they're kind of setting a timer, making Windows itself do it for them later on, another way to maybe stay hidden or ensure execution?
Exactly. It adds another layer of indirection and potential evasion.
Okay, so we've seen 2 distinct groups exploiting the same critical zero-day vulnerability, CVE 2025-298245, but with, slightly different approaches and maybe different immediate objectives. Storm 2460 appears to have gone directly for ransomware deployment after stealing credentials, while Balloonfly, at least in the instance we looked at, focused more on extensive data exfiltration using their Grixpa info stealer first. What are the most important things for someone listening right now to take away from all this?
Well, I think the most immediate and critical takeaway is the absolute necessity of applying security updates, patches, as quickly as possible, especially for Windows.
Yeah.
This whole CVE 2025-29824 situation is just a perfect illustration of how rapidly an unpatched vulnerability, particularly one that allows attackers to gain higher-level access, and elevation of privilege flaw, how quickly it can be exploited by multiple sophisticated threat actors.
It really drives that point home, doesn't it? Patching isn't just a chore, it's critical.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it also underscores that zero-day exploits aren't just the domain of, shadowy nation-state actors or APTs anymore. Ransomware-linked groups are clearly developing, acquiring, and actively using them too.
Yeah, that barrier seems lower now, or maybe the rewards are just too high. It's a stark reminder that even if you feel your systems are secure, these unknown flaws can represent a really significant hidden weakness.
Precisely. And this whole scenario also highlights how attackers are increasingly combining different types of malware in their attacks. In Balloonfly's case, they used an info stealer in conjunction with the exploit, even though they didn't immediately deploy ransomware in that observed case.
Right, and that data theft in itself can have devastating consequences for individuals and organizations, even without the encryption step.
Absolutely. We also see the clear value that these ransomware actors place on achieving privileged access, getting those system rights. It's often the crucial step that allows them to deploy ransomware widely across an entire network and maximize the impact of their attacks.
And the fact that both of these groups seem to be utilizing their own custom tools, you know, PipeMagic for Storm 2460 and Grixpa for Balloonfly, that suggests this trend towards more bespoke malware, right? Designed specifically to evade standard detection methods.
Absolutely. This increasing use of custom or less common tools definitely makes it more challenging for, say, off-the-shelf security solutions to automatically identify and block these threats based on known signatures alone.
Mm-hmm.
And as we observe with Balloonfly, even if ransomware isn't deployed immediately, that initial breach and the exfiltration of sensitive data can still lead to substantial financial losses, regulatory fines, damage to reputation, all sorts of bad outcomes.
Definitely. So beyond just patching, which we agree is absolutely vital, what are some proactive steps organizations should be taking right now based on what we've learned about how these specific attacks unfolded?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? What should organizations be doing to better defend themselves against these kinds of sophisticated and rapidly evolving threats?
What can we do?
Well, based on the information available, Microsoft, in their advisory about this specific vulnerability, provided several key recommendations.
Okay, like what?
Things like making sure that cloud-delivered protection is enabled in your antivirus or endpoint security solutions. This helps identify and block new and emerging threats much more rapidly than just relying on local definitions.
Right, using that broader cloud intelligence.
Exactly. They also recommend implementing device discovery tools to identify and secure any unmanaged or unknown devices popping up on your network, as these can often be easy entry points for attackers.
Finding those shadow IT devices.
Also running endpoint detection and response, or EDR, solutions in block mode. This can be highly effective in actually containing and remediating malicious activity automatically, even if it initially bypasses other security layers.
So not just detecting, but actively stopping it.
Yes. And finally, they strongly advise enabling full automation for investigation and remediation wherever possible within your security tools. This ensures that your systems can respond to identified threats as quickly and efficiently as possible without waiting for manual intervention sometimes.
Those all sound like really critical components of a modern, robust security strategy. This whole situation, the CVE, it really just underscores that cybersecurity is not a static game at all, is it? It's a constant process of adaptation and vigilance.
It absolutely is. This deep dive into the exploitation of CVE 2025-29824 as a zero-day by multiple distinct ransomware-linked groups, it truly highlights the dynamic and ever-evolving nature of these cyber threats. And while, the technical details can get intricate, understanding the attackers' methods, their motivations, their objectives, that provides invaluable insight for strengthening our collective defenses.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, what other unknown vulnerabilities are out there right now, potentially being actively exploited as we speak? And what proactive measures can we take, maybe even beyond just the essential patching and the things Microsoft listed, to further minimize our risk and the potential impact if something does get through? Definitely something to keep pondering.
Indeed. A crucial thought to end on. And speaking of crucial support, we'd like to thank our sponsor again for today's deep dive, Stonefly.
That's right. Stonefly is a leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
And if you're looking for secure, ransomware-proof storage options, remember Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage. You can contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo and learn more.
Definitely worth looking into. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.